Sorry it took me a little bit to come back. This one's taken a while to make. I've been dealing with some health issues and stuff, but I'm going to do the best I can with this. So somebody asked what a glimpse is after my last video about what to do after a glimpse. So I'll kind of talk about it from my perspective. I don't talk about things like this super specifically, just because I don't want people to map my experience onto their own. But sometimes it helps a little bit to know kind of the general direction that stuff like this points you towards. So some people talk about glimpses and what they mean, as far as I would call them from my own experiences. They mean like peak spiritual experiences, right? So whether that comes through meditation or through psychedelics or through some kind of a religious experience or through a traumatic experience or sometimes even a dream. Near-death experiences can be this way sometimes. People will have this kind of peak spiritual experience where they something really enormous seems revealed to them, right? So those things can be part of what I would consider a glimpse, possibly. But when I talk about a glimpse, what I mean is a glimpse through the kind of veneer that we generally have of a personality and a separate self into our true nature as conscious presence awareness or being, whatever term you want to use, right? So that's what I mean when I say a glimpse. I mean a glimpse into our true nature as the ground of being. Now, that being said, those usually come in a couple of flavors. No matter which flavor you get, it involves generally a ceasing of habitual mental thought processes, which then generally results in a ceasing of emotional reactive patterns. So there's a kind of stillness that happens. And in that stillness, because habitual mental activity has ceased, habitual emotional reactivity has ceased, then all of a sudden there's enough room to, let's say, notice what's noticing. Right? That's a little kitschy and a little cliche, but that's what I have for right now. So let's talk about some examples, okay? So on the one side, I would say you have glimpses that come as a form of disappearance or cessation or vanishing, right? So let's talk about an everyday example, which is simply say you're out on a walk, and for whatever reason, you come around a bend in the path. Let's say you're walking on a nice trail someplace, right? So you come around a bend in the trail, and for whatever reason, all of this, all of the chatter that's generally happening in the back of the head drops. And as soon as the chatter drops, whatever emotional kind of currents were carried along with it also drop. And in that moment, it's possible, because both of those things have dropped, that all of a sudden you'll notice that there's just this transparent, clear knowing of experience. But in that moment, you won't even have the context of knowing experience. You won't even, none of that will occur, because those are all mental interpretations. It'll just be this very simple stillness of being. And usually it'll go by real fast, and we won't notice it, and we'll keep walking, and hopefully we'll keep noticing the flowers or the mountains or whatever else we're walking by. But in all likelihood, instead of doing that, we'll think about emails and work and the kids and everything else, right? But for that little flash where everything becomes very still, it's like the context with which we generally identify ourselves disappears. And we're just left with what's in front of us, but because there's no thought process happening, we're not labeling any of it. And so it's kind of, it's this very sort of empty experience, right? So that's an everyday example of a what I would consider a cessation. Sort of a really pronounced version of a cessation would be, say you're sitting in meditation, and similar kind of thing, thoughts drop away, feeling reactivity drops away, but let's say after that, perceptions and sensations drop away. So hearing drops away, bodily sensations drop away, your eyes are maybe closed, so the visual field isn't present. All of a sudden there's just nothing, and yet you are, right? So everything drops away. There's no perceivable phenomena, and yet you are present. So different traditions have different words for that kind of a thing. Nirvikalpa samadhi. In the Christian tradition, they might call it the cloud of unknowing, the void, emptiness, that sort of idea. But it's like all perceptual phenomena, which is how we generally discern our self and our place in the world, drop away. So there we are, as just kind of a pure knowingness, even though there's nothing to know. Yeah? So those are cessation glimpses. Those are vanishing glimpses. On the other hand, there's like what I would call maybe unitive glimpses. So same kind of a deal where thought drops away. So everyday example, thought drops away, all of the emotional reactivity drops away. But something that's kind of left behind is a felt sense of oneness with all that is perceived. So I remember this happening. I remember one specific instance of this. And bear in mind that memory is really fallible, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But the memory that I have, it was, or is, that I was sitting at the mall here in town, which has this really like lovely open kind of atrium place. So it's one of my favorite places to go and just sit and have a cup of coffee, and just kind of watch everybody go by. And as I was sitting there, thought dropped away, emotional reactivity dropped away, and there was spacious awareness left. But along with that, there was this felt sense that all of these perceptions that were left, because they were held within awareness and as awareness, were very much a part of what I am. Yeah? And then out of that emerged this, like, the deepest love. It's very hard to explain sitting in a mall and having the same amount of love for everything within the reach of perception. But that's what happened, right? Because of this sort of realization of emptiness that was then suddenly full of everything, it was a kind of reciprocal event. Reciprocal. So that kind of an event can, it can happen in a much more pronounced way than that. It can also happen in a very, very simple way where all of a sudden you're with another human and you're having an exchange, and for a brief second you can feel this really it's like they're a mirror, or you're a mirror, or it's all a mirror. Yeah, it's this very kind of reflective feeling. And it's like there's no separation between you and the other person. But not just on a we're both human level, on this very, very deep level. It can happen with kind of mindful gazing, where you really look into a person's eyes and suddenly realize you're looking at the same consciousness that they're looking out of. So those are the two kind of flavors of glimpses that I would characterize. Now again, they have to do with seeing through the veneer of separation, right? That's the main thing about them. The tricky thing about glimpses is that we mostly have memory to reference them. They happen and they're gone like everything else. And sometimes the mind will want to fight us a lot on that. So when glimpses happen, they happen. You know, let them happen and then let them go. There's no reason for us to try to recreate them or to try to rationalize them with the mind, especially not in the immediate aftermath. So if you find yourself in some kind of abiding state where one or the other of these sort of modes of operation seems to be consistent, then sometimes having a conversation about that with somebody or getting some further context is really helpful. But if it's a glimpse, and generally glimpses mean that we snap out of it and we come back to our normal operating state, right? Where awakening is this abiding change in context, change of identification. A glimpse is where we see through it, but then all of a sudden we go whoosh, and sort of the mental activity takes us right back into our normal forms of identification. So if that happens, it's not a big deal. Most people have glimpse after glimpse after glimpse after glimpse after glimpse until, eventually many glimpses over time kind of erodes the self-structure to the point where all of a sudden somebody just realizes that their context has shifted. Some people have a big, blow it out of the water experience, but a lot of people it's a slower process. So the main thing from my perspective is if you experience glimpses, don't worry about trying to recreate them. Don't worry about trying to hang on to them. Just let them do what they do. Right? Because we don't do the work does us when it comes to the whole awakening thing. See ya.